on the agenda, item 3, the Metropolitan Strengthening Communities Fund, and I'd like to open by getting staff just to make some commentary on the report and the work that has got us to the set of recommendations that are in front of us today.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. If I could also just very quickly, acknowledge and thank all of the staff involved in this process, which has been, heavy workloads for everyone, and here we are today to make these decisions. So, just to go through the available budgets for the Metropolitan Strengthening Communities Fund, we have a total available budget of just over $3.3 million, and we have total requests in the amount of just over $8 million, so significantly more than what's available. That's come from 238 individual applicants.
Talk about how that compares to previous years.
Sorry?
Talk about how that compares to previous years.
Okay, I don't have the figure, but
okay.
The amount of applications is comparable with previous years when we look at the early learning centres, major orgs and general applications, plus or minus a few, but very much in line. Now, the breakdown, we do have one pre-existing commitment, one 3-year commitment that was approved by Council in the 15-16 financial year. That's to the Youth Council. So that has already been granted. We have our 9 early learning centres, which staff are recommending for funding this year, while further work to develop policy around community organisations who use community facilities is worked on and developed. We have 9 major organisations, an available funding pool of $1.2 million. They are requesting just over $1.7 million. And then we have a total of 219 general applications requesting $5.9 million out of an available budget of just over $1.8 million. So again, some significant work gone in there. Now, so all of these applications have gone through a process of obviously making an application. Specialist staff have then assessed these applications against Council's priorities and outcomes for funding and the relevant criteria, and taking into account the available budget as well. There are 7 applications that Council identified in a workshop last week that are potential fits, if you like, for the Community Resilience and Partnership Fund. Now that will go through a process for decision with Council in the not too distant future. What else have we got here? Sorry, I just lost my place on my notes. That's really sort of all I've probably got to say, Chair. I could probably hand it over to you now to carry on.
Thank you very much, and can I also just reinforce the commentary around the huge amount of work that's gone into the set of recommendations that are in front of us today. I'd certainly also like to acknowledge and thank staff for all of the hard work that's got us to the point that we're at, assessing the applications in the early part of the process to bring staff recommendations to us, and then the huge amount of work on Friday afternoon that went into supporting the workshop that we had as well. So thank you to you and to the team of staff that have supported the whole process. It's certainly made life a lot easier for us that we've got that level of support, so thank you.
I probably should just very quickly also add that the staff are available today should there be questions for them.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. So we've got 2 documents which are either additional or changed to support the meeting today, one of which is the most up-to-date set of recommendations that came out of the workshop on Friday afternoon, and the other of which is a set of resolutions which have been circulated that we'll, in fact, that we've got on the board in front of us on the screen, which will be the resolutions that we're working with today as well. So the way that I propose to run this would be to have any discussion and any questions based on the report which is in front of us, the spreadsheet that I just referred to, and to the resolutions that are in front of us as the proposal coming into this meeting. And any further changes that were to be made or to be proposed would be changes to those documents rather than the documents that are in the agenda, which of course was produced prior to the workshop on Friday. So now let's move to any questions that councillors may have. Sarah.
Thank you. And there has been an enormous amount of work gone into this, and it is incredibly difficult, and it was really disheartening to see, I guess, that there was a number of the priority 2 ones that were originally not recommended for funding because there wasn't budget available. And I understand, you know, there was the 500,000 taken out for the partnership fund, but compared to other years, and I'd asked for this last week but don't have it yet, is how has our community funding been over the last, how does it compare to other years? So have we got more in a strictly dollar term now than we did in the past, or is it the same as it has been sort of for the last 5 or 6 years?
Are we referring to funding going to community boards?
No, community funding. Community funding generally, so the funding that we give to the community, either Metropolitan or community boards. So the Strengthening
Communities Fund?
All up, yep, right. All of that funding. Because, I mean, because it has varied, so we have a different allocation now for Metropolitan and community boards, so you can't just do just Metropolitan, but the combined total.
The combined total is comparative, so it's been pretty stable at approximately $7.2 million since about 2010-11.
Yeah. Okay, so we haven't made sort of automatic adjustments for either inflation or for the fact that, you know, post-quake we've had a huge increase in the number of groups that have popped up that are doing strengthening communities type work. It's kind of just stayed stable the whole way.
Stable the whole way. Immediately after the earthquakes too, other funds were operating, which you know, covered some of that.
Okay. Yeah. And what I'd like to maybe foreshadow is adding a sort of an in principle resolution for the council to consider, that we ask staff to increase by 10% the available community funding to be divvied up between Metro and community boards in the LTP process. It's an in principle decision to raise it by 10%.
So it's probably worth noting that for this year and next year there will be the additional funding because of the extra money that's come in for the community response fund. So it might be in the years following that in the LTP that you want to inflation adjust this pot. Yep. Yep. Okay.
But moving a resolution today to put something on the agenda for the LTP process that we consider as part of the LTP process would be entirely in order. So if you've got some wording that you'd like to add to our resolutions that we're crafting today, I'd be happy to incorporate that in the main resolution. Yep, great, thank you. All right, so if we can work on that and add it to the resolution, that would be good. Thank you. Yanni.
I just wanted to just check on 2 things. One is, who set the criteria for the funding applications? And when was it done?
Council approved the current criteria.
Right.
So the criteria was, I guess, developed and workshopped with staff and an elected member working party, and then approved by council.
Cool. And when was that?
That was 2 years ago, I believe now. So this is the 2nd year under the current criteria.
Right. Okay, thank you. And the second question was, so there's a number of ones that have been put into Metropolitan, but they look like they're local. So the criteria around what's Metropolitan and local, I'm just wondering if you can just explain to us how you've done that, and whether that's changed or it's the same as from 2 years ago. And then just related to that also, is there a process by which some of the community board applications can be put into that new partnership resilience fund? Because I can think of some in our area, for example, that would qualify in line with the ones that we're recommending today, but I don't know what the process is to do that. So sorry, kind of two questions there.
Yeah. So to answer the first part of your question, Councillor, around metropolitan local organisations, it is where the groups tell us that their participants come from, so the people that use the services that the organisation provides. Currently, if the spread is covering 4 or more community board areas, they are a metropolitan organisation. Now that was increased this year. Previous years it was 3 or more community board areas. And the second part of the question?
Was it about referral to the community response fund?
Yes, from the community board applications meeting.
Advise on that, one, when the report comes to council for the first tranche, but also an update memo from the ones that some councils hadn't read that previous memo, and I think you had it on and read it out. So we can update you with the process for doing that by email, so everyone gets the same information. It's recorded.
It's like a process to put in the ones at our community board to that first chance for consideration, but I don't know what that process is.
So we'll
You'll let us know.
send it, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And my understanding is that the paper on that Community Resilience and Partnership Fund is only a matter of weeks away from coming to council. It should be with council before the end of this month, is my understanding, so we'll have the opportunity to have those conversations at that time.
Except the boards are doing their funding now, so that's why it's quite urgent, because they'll obviously want to know if there's an opportunity.
Yeah, so if we can get some earlier information to the boards, that would be helpful. Thank you. Any further questions? Jimmy?
How about the 92, item 92? Whether my vehicle is different from here. Here is a grant funding 0, but why my vehicle here is $18,000? So which one is correct? 92, the Pacific one.
92, Pacific Youth Leadership and Transformation Council.
It's 16,000, or it's a 0?
It's been referred.
The recommendation coming out of the workshop on Friday afternoon is 0, and there may be some background to that recommendation.
It's under consideration from the Community Response Fund.
So this one, yeah, so this one, Jimmy, if you look at 4C in the recommendations,
yes,
Pacific Youth Leadership and Transformation Council is to be referred to the Community Resilience and Partnership Fund,
okay,
along with those others, on the basis that it might be a better match for that fund,
yes,
and there may in fact be a different or better outcome by putting it through that process.
Okay, okay.
So there was some discussion about that at the workshop, and it may well be that this is the right place for it to be rather than considering it today.
Okay.
And all of those organisations that are noted in 4,
yes,
staff will be contacting them to explain
yes,
the rationale for why they've been put into that category,
yes,
and when the outcomes will be considered.
So number 4 already in consideration by that fund, and it's those 2 that are just new.
Okay, so apparently the organisations noted in Resolution 4 are already under active consideration for the Community Resilience and Partnership Fund. Yes. So there'll be recommendations coming to Council at some point that we will be the decision makers on, and then those noted in 5 are groups that were identified through our discussions in the workshop, yes, as being very likely to meet the criteria for that fund, so they're new ones which have been put into that process. But Pacific Youth Leadership and Transformation Council are already under active consideration for a recommendation for funding, yes, through the Community Resilience and Partnership Fund, on which we're the decision makers, and as I noted, we've already got a paper coming to Council later this month.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? All right. Phil, yes.
Adding to net 122 and also for Anglican Care at 126. And I think Chris might have a record of that.
Okay, so adding to net, we've now got a resolution to fund to 13,250. Yep.
That's good for clarity. And Anglican Care.
Anglican Care, we've got a recommendation to fund to 15,000 against a recommended amount of 20,000.
Yeah. Okay.
And they were both priority 2s, which on the original recommendations that came into the workshop were not to be funded at that level. So they're decisions that were made as a result of the councillor workshop.
That's right.
So recommendations that were made as a result of the councillor workshop.
I'd also like to make a comment when it's appropriate in relation to Anglican City Mission and their project, and to make sure that different projects that we fund are in fact aligned with other projects.
Was there something you were wanting to move as regards that you wanted to capture by way of a resolution?
I do really, yes.
Now might be the time to do that.
Yep. So it's basically what I'm suggesting is that staff have further discussions with Christchurch's City Mission and other relevant agencies, if that's applicable, relating to sheltered and emergency housing projects being aligned with Christchurch's Housing First program.
So this is something that you're requesting staff to do.
Yep.
In terms of the way that we work with that particular organisation, is obviously not a condition that we're putting on the funding, but it's just how we can work with them to get outcomes that are aligned with. And I'm aware that there's work that you and Glenn Livingstone have been doing around the Housing First.
I'm happy to explain some of that briefly. So clearly the leaders of the different agencies have been discussing ways forward to progress Housing First as a housing program, and in effect they are beginning to work as a collective already, and that's great. And so those discussions have already started, and Glenn and I have also had some discussions with the key people in those agencies. I just want to make sure that in fact those conversations continue, and that so that in fact particularly the accommodation that our council support, that in fact the different programs are aligned, and in fact that they don't contradict each other. That's all.
So the purpose of any resolution that you'd be proposing would be just to encourage that joined up approach and that alignment.
That's right. So it's really that staff have further discussions with them. Asking staff.
All right. So have you got some wording that you wanted to put forward that we can capture? If you could pass that to staff, that would be great. Well, what we'll do is come up with one resolution that will be everything that's on the sheet that's been circulated, plus the couple of additional resolutions which have been signalled in the discussion we've had this morning. My intention would be, once we've got the wording captured, which obviously we're just working on now, my intention would be to move that, to get someone to second it. And Phil, as chair of the committee, would you be happy to second, so the relevant committee that deals with community funding, you'd be happy to second that? And then at that point we'll move into debate, and then we'll vote on the resolution once we get to that point. Okay, so how are we going with wording just to capture those two resolutions? Supporting principle, raising the total amount of community funding available for grant allocations in each year by 10% in the long-term plan, and then inflation adjusted each year after that. That staff have further discussion with Christchurch City Mission and other relevant agencies relating to sheltered and emergency housing projects being aligned with Christchurch's Housing First programmes. Yep. And Sarah, you're happy with the wording that we've got there? 13? Yep. Okay. Great. Pauline.
Sorry, just one more question. I do remember on Friday we discussed the clown doctors. Where did we get to with that?
Which application number is it?
Sorry, that's number 239. Would they be a fit for the resilience fund?
I've got no idea what the application is.
So there was some discussion about this in the workshop. The recommendation coming out of the workshop is not to fund. I'm not quite sure.
I remember it came up, but I don't know if we pursued the discussion very fully.
There was some discussion about it. The mayor certainly raised it in the workshop, and there was some discussion. The result of that discussion was a recommendation not to fund. I'm not sure whether...
Yes, that's our record as well.
Yeah, I was just trying to ask if there was any further commentary from staff. But yeah, there was some reasonably robust discussion about this at the workshop.
I don't think we kind of pursued it to the end, but I'm just wondering if...
referring it to the DRF was the decision.
Yep.
So should that be...
referred to the DRF?
Yeah, should that be recorded, or... Because we're recording the ones that are being referred to the Resilience Fund.
There are a number of these that may well end up applying for discretionary response funding, and my understanding is that staff would be working with, I mean, staff obviously will be getting back to all of these groups, and where there are appropriate next steps in terms of further applications or other funds that would be appropriate for them to apply to, that would be picked up in those conversations, is my understanding. Am I right in saying that, or is there something further that we need to report?
Yeah, I mean, asking people by way of resolution to go to the DRF is perhaps raising expectations beyond what we should.
But we can be confident that staff would raise any appropriate other funds in the feedback from this round of funding as you go back to those organisations.
That's right.
Yep, so I think we can understand that will happen naturally anyway.
But bearing in mind we've just dipped into the DRF to move some money to number 122, are we confident that there is something left in there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're certainly coming out of the workshop. We were very comfortable with the amount that was left in the discretionary response.
Yes, we put additional money in the DRF to address those that might have been referred to it. That's over and above the balance that already existed.
Indeed.
So just as a refresher there, would it be possible for us to receive a memo after this meeting on which ones have been referred back to the DRF, please, out of this?
Yes.
Is it possible?
Yep, thank you. Okay, so we're through questions. Anne?
Yes, just a question, a clarification question. I wasn't able to be there for the whole of the meeting on Thursday afternoon. I'm just wondering about the understanding or the reasoning behind giving the Vegetarian Society the 6,000 and the Royal New Zealand Plunket Society 2,700. I'm just wondering about the reasoning behind that decision. Sorry, it's on, 192 is the Royal New Zealand Plunket Society, 2,700, and 204, the New Zealand Vegetarian Society, 6,750.
Both of those were organisations that people asked questions about, and by exception were referred to again during the priority 2 discussion, and then the outcome was that those for which council members felt there was support were allocated 75% of the recommended amount. So 1, there were obviously expressions of support around the table. 2, the amount allocated was 75% of that recommended.
And that reflected the total amount of the fund that was available for allocation, which obviously wasn't able to be 100% across the board, and it was felt that a fair way of dealing with those which were raised by exception was to allocate a proportion of funding rather than a differing amount of funding for each one.
Plunkett only applied for $4,000.
It's worth noting that Plunkett only applied for $4,800.
Yeah, they didn't apply for very much.
Thank you. Okay, so that now brings us to the end of questions. So I'm now happy to move the set of resolutions which are in front of us. Phil, you're happy to second that? So that's now been moved and seconded. So I invite councillors to debate the motion which is now in front of us. Pauline.
Perhaps we can look at Sarah's number 13, is that? Support in principle raising the total amount of community funding available each year by 10%. So raise it by 10% in the LTP and then adjust it each year. Is that correct? Yep.
And that has the effect of referring that to the long-term plan process, and that decision would be made in its final form as part of the long-term plan decision making. Mike.
If it's okay with Sarah, could we amend that to actually put in the financial year that we're talking about for being the next one, 18-19? Support in principle raising the total amount of community funding available for grant allocations by 10% in the long-term plan for financial year 18-19.
Yeah.
I mean, that might include that partnership funding, that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
For financial year 18-19, and then inflation adjusted each year after that.
Yeah, and then you probably don't need each year after allocations.
Supporting principle raising the total amount of community funding available for grant allocations by 10% of the long-term plan for financial year 18-19, and then inflation adjusted each year after that. And that actually clarifies that. I agree with the change of wording. I think that just really clarifies it. Phil, as the seconder of the motion, you're comfortable with that change? Thank you. Okay, so now, is this a question, or are we now moving into debate?
Since we're adding like sort of new resolutions, just the whole issue of meeting with the health board, the DHB, over the whole increase in health funding that we're having to look at as a city, I think is something that we've previously resolved, and I think it would be good to actually, while I'm supportive in principle of looking at raising our funding, I'm also very aware of the reliance that we're picking up because of other people's responsibility in the city, mainly central government's funding that's being cut or not sufficient to deal with the demand. So I would like us to meet with the CDHB to discuss the ability to look at the whole grants funding that we're giving out and the funding that they're providing to those groups.
Yeah, and there are a number of groups as part of the review of funding which is coming up. There are a number of groups that we're going to need to be meeting with in terms of working out our strategic response to the way that we fund various organisations, in terms of working out what council's priorities are at that high level. And it would be reasonable to expect that we would be meeting with the health board, we would be meeting with groups like Creative New Zealand, for example, with the RADA Foundation and other funders, so that we can have a more joined up approach to funding, but also so that we can make sure that the funding priorities reflect council's overall priorities and are actually a joined up approach to what funding might be available or could be available or should be available for organisations working in various different sectors, so that we're making sure that the funding that we put in as council reflects our priorities, but also at the same time is leveraging those other funds to the best they can for other organisations. So I would expect that that would be picked up as part of the funding review, which will occur before we get to applications next time. If you wanted to move something that would see that specifically taken account of as part of that funding review, it would be perfectly in order.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know when we last met with the elected district health board. Like, we haven't met for ages. Like, we just seem to have no relationship with them, and it would be really good to actually meet with them. So I just think we should meet with the Canterbury District Health Board to discuss matters of mutual interest, including the issue of grants funding.
Yep, so let's so just comparing that with what we've got in paragraph 9, request staff report to council by the end of September 2017 on terms of reference, a comprehensive strategic funding review of all of the funds and the support that council provides to sustain and support organisations of the city, including the relationship of the council with other funders. So that arguably could be picked up in there, but I appreciate that, you know, you're referring to discussion that's occurred in the past which didn't land in a result. You're obviously keen to pick that up by way of resolution now to ensure that there is a result. More than happy to refer to that specifically.
Including the DHB after other funders on 9,
It's getting a governance meeting
Yep.
to talk through the funding pressure that we're under because of the lack of health funding.
Yep. So has some wording been provided to staff just now?
It's pretty straightforward.
Yep, all right. So if you can dictate once again what you want to put up there, and we'll do that.
15, that the council seek a meeting with the Canterbury District Health Board to discuss the issue of grants funding towards health-related organisations. Grants funding towards health-related organisations.
And as I say, that's something that would be very likely to be picked up as part of that review of funding anyway, but I think it's good that it's specified, given that you're referring to discussion that's happened in the past where there hasn't been progress. It would be good to see that progress in the next short while. That's all picked up in paragraph 9, really. You would expect, as part of that comprehensive funding review, that we would be meeting with all concerned organisations for the reasons that I just outlined. So the wording here, 15, was it that council meet with? Yep, so that council meet with. The Canterbury District Health Board to discuss the issue of grants funding to what, yeah.
That council is actually at the very top anyway.
Oh, so we can, yeah, all right, so get rid of everything up to meet. Thank you. Okay. You're happy to include? Yep, no problem at all. All right, so now let's move into debate. So who is wanting to contribute to debate? Yanni.
I'll be very quick just to say, I know this, and it's already been said, but thank you to the staff for the huge amount of work that you've done. I think one issue that we do need to focus on, and hopefully the review can pick this up, is the timing. Normally we'd have a lot more time between the workshop and the decision making, and also a number of groups are waiting for the funding in September, so it would be good to get this, looking at the timetable. But I appreciate you've had a whole bunch of changes with the community board structure and the funding allocation as well, so it has been difficult. But you know, I just think this is one thing that council does that we should be incredibly proud of, that we support the community infrastructure in our city that ultimately saves a lot of money because we're investing up front in communities rather than just the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So I think we should be incredibly proud as a council that we continue to fund these organisations that have applied. I know that not everyone will be happy with the quantum, but at the end of the day we're meeting a number of balancing demands and I think we've got to a good outcome. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it has been a huge effort from staff in the assessments and to look forward to getting the review done, but it's good that we make the allocations today.
Thank you. Pauline.
Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge the huge challenge this has been, and acknowledging staff for the myriad of obstacles you've had to wade through to sort this out, but also to acknowledge all the community groups that we have in our city at grassroots level that are doing their very best to strengthen our communities. And it's the council support of these groups that's actually got us through the earthquakes the way that we did, and it shows us, and it showed us then, how important this is to support people in the community who are doing this and have the vision and the energy to go out there and support their local residents. Strengthening communities is kind of one of those words that's almost lost its meaning because we say it so many times. It's probably better to talk about our social infrastructure, and it's really, really vital for every city. So I particularly support number 13, increasing the amount. Somehow we've got to find that money. I was actually considering doing that myself because in actual fact, because we haven't had an increase since, I'd say well before 2010 actually, it's actually been decreasing. So I think that's a very good move there to actually start looking at this fund. It's been totally oversubscribed to, and it makes it very, very difficult to sort out who gets what. And actually every application in here, we've all gone into bat for everything that we support. We say, but this is a really good group and they're doing, but they all are. And so it's been really, really hard. And I think all of us are going to go forward and work with staff to try and find ways through our networks or through our funding pots here that we can support the ones that haven't been supported today somehow. So, yeah, thank you, staff, and thank you, Christchurch.
Thank you very much. Now, I've got Phil, Dion, Glenn, and Anne, and Jimmy. So, Phil.
Some of the things I was going to say have been said, and I won't be too long, but I join other councillors in sincerely thanking staff. A huge amount of work goes into this, and I think this round has never been harder for me as a councillor, especially because of the much increased demand, and in fact, as has been referred to, a decreased availability and supply of the funding, and I'm glad we are going to look at it in the long-term plan. I'm also glad that that in fact there's going to be another round in effect with the Community Resilience Partnership Fund, and having a review to clarify all of this funding is going to be essential. There's a lot of different streams here, and we have to make sure, in fact, that we're comparing apples with apples. And so I look forward to doing that and working with staff to achieving that. So big thanks to staff again.
Thank you. Dion.
Yeah, I'll just echo those words about thank you to the staff, but also thank you to all the community groups out there who do provide such a level of service to our city and actually support so many people and try and create the city as a cool place. I was actually going to ask for number 13 to be put separately, but I've actually just sort of thought about it a little bit deeper, and I think it'll be fine. The only thing I was going to think about with putting it separately is supporting in principle or doing an investigation to see if it can be done available, because I'm just worried about precedent on the money that we have in our budgets. Budgets are very tight, and I just don't want to be putting more money into budgets without actually putting some real thought into how that money's coming or where it's going to come from and those kind of things. But I think the staff will be able to do that, so I'm pretty happy with that. And that was all I want to say.
I already have a request to put 13 separately anyway, so I will do that. Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you. Yes, I also wish to acknowledge our hard-working staff for all their hard work behind the scenes, as well as this process, which isn't always easy. My concerns particularly remain over the housing and mental health kind of sectors of our community, if you like. In that regard, I support Phil's move over the Housing First model in terms of having that congruence with the other agencies so that we're all on the same page, because it is quite a different model that essentially places people in housing literally first and then provides those services to go with them. It's good to see funding reflected in priorities for agencies such as Battered Women's Trust and Aviva. Battered Women's Trust bears the burden of most of the violence cases in our community and seeks to work with the community in trying to make progress there. Aviva's more at the kind of high end of some of those cases. Obviously with the partnership fund, pleased over that. With resolution 13, that's a good move, Sarah. Part of me though is thinking let's not stop there. So yes, totally agree with tagging the index, you know, taking it to CPI. But next year, do we want to explore even taking it further, another 10%? So, yeah, okay. And there's some other groups I'm aware of missed out on funding at this stage, but I truly hope they get some through the DRF process later on.
Thank you. Anne.
Just totally in support of number 13, and want to add sort of the word urgently somewhere in there, because obviously being a new person coming to this process have been totally struck by the fact that the resources are just not there, and they need to be, because this is about our, as people have said, our community infrastructure and future-proofing our community. So very much endorsing number 13. Thank you very much for this, for the work that staff have done. I mean, it's an incredibly challenging process, and it's a very difficult one when you're making decisions about who's in and who's out. So I would really like our legacy as a council to be a group of people who really prioritised people and their needs. So hopefully that's what we will do going forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Jimmy.
First one, I'd like to appreciate the staff, because all those paperwork is not easy to prepare this report, and also have the service or have the discussion with the community. I would like to emphasize actually the community to apply for this funding is help council comply to the council committee outcome. For instance, this year we particularly emphasize we would like to have a strong community, like to have a livable city, like to have a healthy environment, etc., or indirectly to help the city, the prosperity, the economy, etc. Each community is partnership with the council. So they are not just applying funding for their individual, their group, the agencies comply with the council, the outcome. The outcome is good. But this year, I'm still a little bit frustrated. It's different from the previous year. Because this year, if we review those category 2, actually they are total meet the criteria of the funding allocation. But due to the council funding, is kind of very restricted and limited, so they miss out. Even we have some different way, like if they are eligible, the staff to help them to kind of apply for funding from the Metro discretionary fund. That's okay, but still kind of the where we is restricted. So the Sarah mentioned the item 13. I think that's a very good recommendation, etc. But this year I'm particularly concerned that we would like to emphasize this kind of active citizenship or partnership. How do we to make it happen? If funding not sufficient funding can align with this goal or this target, a bit difficult. In other words, I'm particularly concerned that this year the multicultural strategy has been adopted by the council, and also there has been the kind of formal launch by the council. We mentioned we would like to strengthen our engagement with those multicultural group. If we recognize 22% of this the cultural diverse community, and more, maybe we're more, but how do we to make that happen through our engagement with them? This also my particular concern. Yes. So that's my view. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. So in front of us we've got a spreadsheet with 258 different organisations and different groups that are doing some great work out there in the community, and the thing I think that strikes all of us is the huge amount of work that's going on out there through these various groups, a lot of it voluntary, huge amount of voluntary work going on out there, the whole variety of work, the volume of work and the value of that work. I think it's something that's is important we recognise through this process. We have $8 million worth of applications for $3 million worth of funding in round figures. That tells us the capacity and the opportunity, and I think it also shows the limitations of what we're able to do with the amount of funding which is available. And it's become clear, I think, as we've gone through the workshop and this whole process, that we need to take a more joined up approach to the way that we plan to use and do use this funding. Strengthening communities. Council can only ever be a catalyst in that space. It's the community groups that do the work to make our community stronger. But we, along with other funders, are a catalyst in that space, and we need to make sure that we use that role as well as we possibly can, so that from the relatively small amount of funding that we've got to provide versus the large number of applications, we get to the results that we want as a city and as communities. So that's where the comprehensive funding review, which has been referred to a number of times throughout the process that we've gone through, really comes into play. That's where we look at where we can make the way that we administer this funding easier and more effective for the organisations, maybe easier for ourselves, and the amount of work that staff have done has been noted. There's a huge amount of work goes into not only this, but a number of other funding processes, events and festivals, and the funding that's administered by the community boards and so on, a huge amount of work. So if there's a way that we can look at reviewing some of that makes it easier for applicants and easier to do the assessments, that's something that we certainly would value, and certainly where there are opportunities for us to take up a more joined up approach with other funders that are active in this space, so that we can again get better value from the money that we as a council, we as a city are putting into these organisations. And it's for that reason that we have referred a number of organisations, those in Resolution 4, to the Community Resilience and Partnership Fund. We now have this new fund that may turn out to be a better match for those organisations which are already in the process of being considered for that fund, and there'll be decisions that Council will make once that paper comes to Council. Those in item 5, which are groups which have been identified through this decision-making process, of quite likely to be a good fit for that new fund as well, and obviously we'll be making those considerations on staff recommendation within a very short time as well. So item 10 in the resolutions establishes the funding working group, the comprehensive funding review that we've talked about. Staff have already been doing some work on that. Item 10 puts some governance support around that process so that that then reports back to council. Further work obviously required, item 11 in the resolutions around the Early Learning Centre funding. This is something which has been discussed on a number of occasions in the past. This is where we're essentially funding the Early Learning Centres for the rent that they pay to council for the facilities that they're in. I think it's worth looking to see whether there are different ways that we can look at doing that, whether there's a better process that we can come up with to support those Early Learning Centres. And then item 12 in the resolution, in order to be able to take the most comprehensive, far-reaching approach to the review, we need the freedom to do that. So whilst we did encourage groups to apply for multi-year funding, 3-year funding, the thinking has been that it would be better to allow us the opportunity for the funding review to be as far-reaching as it can be and needs to be, without the constraint of having groups that have been funded for 3 years as we move into that process. But of course, one of the things that we're looking at through that funding review is the way that we can provide more certainty and more ease of application and reporting for the groups that are applying. So that's certainly something that we'll be taking into account as we go through that funding review, even though it does mean that we haven't wanted to tie ourselves into 3-year funding arrangements at this particular time, so that we've got the flexibility. So that certainly provides some explanation as to the resolutions and the thinking behind them. But once again, to conclude, thank you once again to staff who've done all of this work. Thank you to the groups who do all of that work out in our community and whose applications we've had the privilege and the opportunity to consider. So on that note, I will put the resolution. I'll put everything apart from paragraph 13 first of all, and then we'll take paragraph 13 separately. So I'll put the main resolution excluding paragraph 13. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. And I'll put paragraph 13. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you.